All right. Hi, everybody. I'm here today with Dylan, and we're going to be drawing some snakes in our nature journals, seeing some of Dylan's snakes, and learning about keeping animals at home. Welcome to the show, Dylan.
Thank you so much. Very, very happy to be here.
Great. So I'm going to quickly share a few pages in my nature journal about drawing snakes because I think that it's something that people don't always get to draw or might not have access to. Luckily, there's some cool zoos and stuff near me, so I've been able to draw snakes fairly frequently. I also have a pet snake, and Dylan's going to share some of his pet snakes. So in case some of you at home have not had the opportunity to draw live snakes, Dylan's going to help us out with that right now. Well, where should we start off, Dylan?
Well, I'll grab my carpet python, my jungle carpet python.
Okay, everybody get your drawing stuff. If you're here watching the show, hopefully you're into drawing and got your nature journaling and drawing stuff all ready to go because Dylan's about to show us some of his snakes. As usual, they're probably going to be moving, so get ready to do some quick sketches. I'm going to switch to my document camera. Awesome. So you could tell us a little bit about the snake while we're looking at it.
So this is a jungle carpet python. They are native to Australia. As you see, he's going to wrap up my microphone here. He was born in May of 2018. So you can see he's actually quite small. He's a little timid guy. Actually, he might hang out if we can get him to hang out on this mic, that might actually work out quite well. He's going to try to go under my desk. He is a little flighty, like I was saying, so he may try to escape. Hopefully you guys are okay with drawing a fast-moving animal. Maybe you can see himself in the camera there. I love jungle carpet pythons because they have this very stark black and yellow contrast, which I think is beautiful. When they are born, they're gray and black, basically. They have very little color, and that's one of the exciting things about having a species like this is as they age, as they get older, they get brighter and brighter, and the blacks get darker and darker. And now I would say he's basically adult color. He's definitely not adult size. He's a few more feet to grow. Maybe we'll get to about 5 feet, maybe 6 feet in a few years. But right now you can see he's not a huge snake. He likes to explore, as you can see.
Cool.
And I don't know, let's see if I can get his face close to the camera. 1 second.
Okay. So for everyone who's nature journaling this at home, one strategy would be to go for quick sketches and then also taking some notes when Dylan shares important pieces of information to be jotting those down. Because words, numbers, and images are the 3 languages of nature journaling. Oh yeah, there we go. That was a cool.
Yeah, so obviously with pythons, they have some nice deep heat pits in the face, so there's some pretty cool definition. And the Latin name for these guys are Morelia spilota chenii. They are a subspecies of carpet python.
Morelia
spilota chenii.
Okay.
And it's Latin, so who knows if I'm saying it correctly.
That's a good thing about Latin.
It doesn't matter if you mess it up.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. What was the and then what's the name? Isn't there like a name for that color change that you were mentioning? I feel like I've heard Roy talk
ontogenic ontogenic change. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. Ontogenetic.
Okay, ontogenetic or something like that.
Yeah,
okay,
ontogenetic color change, and that's as they change as they mature from sort of a neonate to an adult. And it's, as I said, it's one of the most exciting parts about keeping an animal like this, but also like this, the pattern and the color is so striking on this species. It makes it just such a perfect display animal. His terrarium is above my shoulder here. You can't really see it because the lights are blowing it out, but I have lots of live plants in there, and I would say pretty much every day he's out basking. He's anytime someone comes over, even if they don't like snakes, this guy's going to be out and he's going to be showing his colors, and he's sitting underneath his halogen bulb. And I don't even if you're afraid of snakes, you can't not appreciate the beauty of something like this.
Yeah, that's definitely a species that I'm really interested in, and I just remember seeing how I love the yellow and black contrast. What do you think is the deal with the yellow and black? One thing that people do a lot. Ooh, nice opportunity to draw the head right there. Could you talk about the pits again? What's up with that?
Okay, so the heat pits, if you can see right under his eye there, right under his lip, that is an organ that some snakes have. not all snakes, most pythons do, that allows them to sense heat. So pythons especially, or carpet pythons especially, are very driven off of heat. That's how they will track their prey when they're hunting.
Mhm.
Carpet python, this species typically spends a lot of times in trees, so they are hunting birds and small mammals and whatnot, and that's one of the ways they hunt and track their prey at night is they're going to see the temperature of an animal coming by, and that organ. Let's see if we can get it. Allows them to pick up on that. You can
Wow.
kind of
So
see it there.
it's not just pit vipers. It's not just poisonous venomous snakes that can sense heat that way then, huh?
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And you were also asking about the camouflage, right?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing with this species is you look at this animal, it is bright yellow and dark black, and you think, how is that camouflage? You look at this and go, this thing stands out like a sore thumb. And that's what I thought for a long time. But once I put him in his enclosure with lots of live plants, especially with the light sort of shining through the foliage, one of the first things that I noticed, and I have this on YouTube if anyone wants to check out, when I put him in there, all of a sudden he became very difficult to see. This pattern of sort of breaking up the blacks and the yellows, it made it difficult to distinguish the difference between his body and sticks and branches and sunlight, or in this case light from the lamp shining through the enclosure. So all of a sudden it became so clear why they have this sort of cryptic pattern. It doesn't stand out in the wild. Instead, they can use this sort of dappled sunlight that comes through the rainforest, and they blend in perfectly. It's really, really remarkable. And that's one of the reasons, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, that I love to keep in a naturalistic way, so you can sort of exploit some of these natural evolved traits.
Very cool. I'm going to switch to my document camera and include myself on here for a second and just give people some ideas of some of the things that I've been trying to do. Definitely be sure to use words when you're nature journaling in a situation. The cool thing is that even though we're at home right now, this is very similar to the kind of nature journaling we'd be doing in the field. I mean, you'd be very lucky to get this much time with the snake in the field, but some people are nature journaling in Australia and do run into this genus. And so you might run into a species in your area and get a chance to nature journal, but it'll probably be moving. So remember, words can be a really way to capture information. Also notice how I'm breaking things up. I'm doing lots of quick sort of gesture drawings. Luckily, we got that opportunity to see the face for a little bit longer. Remember that if maybe you're not really confident in the visuals of your drawing, you can add words to it to explain what things are. So I'm going to put an arrow here and just write heat sensing pits. You can also use your words for the color. Sometimes you might not have time to whip out your watercolors really quickly, but you can use words for the colors, and then you can come back later. Also, if you are watching this later in the recording, the recording of this, obviously you can pause at any time. Another strategy that I like for snakes is to separate the shapes of the drawing of the shapes from the drawing of the pattern. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll just over in a separate area try to capture the pattern as if it were flattened out. So what do some of those spots and stripes look like separate from the snake? Because one thing that Dylan pointed out is that the cryptic pattern, the camouflage, is breaking up the outline of the snake. And what that means as an artist is that if I start drawing that pattern over the entire times, that pattern hides the volumetric shape of the snake. So what I want to see in my drawing is something that looks three-dimensional, and there's ways that you can model that in your drawing with shadows and stuff, but many snakes actually have a pattern that confuses that. So sometimes coming over.
And I will say, for those who are listening, this is a small snake. You can see the thickest part of his body is maybe the size of like a highlighter pen or a marker. But he's squeezing my hand right now, and I don't know if you can see my wedding band is right there. So he's squeezing my two fingers together, and that actually even like hurts. I can feel that much pressure. And this is a small snake. So the amount of muscle and power that snakes have is really remarkable. And as you know, Marley, you have a tree boa yourself. The animals that are designed to spend a lot of time in the trees, they're very thin and light and fast, and they have quite long tails. You think, how can you look at a snake and go, isn't the entire thing a tail? But after the vent is really when the tail starts, and the carpet python has quite a long tail for grabbing branches and hanging on, and yeah, they are a very fun species.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I think about drawing. I think drawing snakes is really good for any type of artist, because one of the things that you have to practice in art is drawing cylinders in perspective. And basically, snakes are these huge cylinders that are constantly like changing angles, and just practicing drawing that over and over again is really, really useful. Like, I definitely flattened out some of my cylinders here, but it's a good practice just to, I feel like if you practice drawing tarantulas and snakes all the time, you could draw anything, because a tarantula is kind of like a human hand too. And a classical drawing exercise is to practice drawing your hand, because it has so many cylinders in different perspectives. All right, that is really cool. So everybody who's doing this at home, make sure you have some good sketches here, sort of gestural sketches that you've tried to do, hopefully a lot. Focus on the quantity. Don't worry about if each one is perfect. Maybe a close-up of the head, a little bit of the pattern, some words, at least the species. One thing you can be doing is writing down vocabulary words sort of in the corner, and you can always look those up later. You can use question marks if you're not sure about spelling. And then one other thing to do would be to have some questions. So nature journaling, we always try to add some questions. So take a second to write down a few if you haven't already, and then we'll transition to the next animal. What are we going to be looking at next?
Next is going to be my Brazilian Rainbow Boa. So as soon as I get this guy off my hand, you guys can continue to draw for a little bit. It may take me a minute or two, and then I'll pull the next snake out.
Great. I'm going to look over at the comments and say hi to people who are here. Really excited. Looks like Ray Bonto is joining us today. Super glad you can make it, Ray Bonto. And hi, Terry. Terry's joined in. Hi, Ivea. Hi, Jean. Super glad you all could make it. For any of you who aren't posting the comments, that's fine. But if you want to, just go ahead and say hi, where you're tuning in from. And, oh, yay, Angie's here also. Hi, Angie. What does it eat? I'm going to write down some questions while we're waiting for the next one. So right now, while we're in this transition stage, try to see how many questions you can come up with, or you can go back in and touch up some of your other drawings. You can also add color if you want, or darken things, add contrast. Some of the vocab words. Ooh, here we go. Rainbow Boa. All right, change to your next page.
All right. Sorry that took a long time.
No worries. That was fine.
This one will be a little bit of a mover too, but let me see if we can get some amazing shots.
All right, I'm gonna put you on solo layout here.
Let's see if I can.
All right, so remember your strategies. I recommend separating the pattern from the shape of the snake on this one in particular. So tell us a little bit about this species.
So this is a Brazilian Rainbow Boa, obviously native to Brazil. An incredible species. I mean, I know that the web camera does not pick up the most amount of colors, but just so you guys are aware, 1 second. She's sort of a like burnt orange color, and these incredible circles. I mean, look at that. It almost looks like it's fake. Black circles running along her body, and black polka dots as well. And she has a striped face. Let me see if I can bring her head to the camera. She's being relatively calm right now, which is quite nice. A white belly. And the reason they call them rainbow boas is because they have this incredible iridescence that the webcam will not pick up. But when she's underneath sort of natural light or UV light or even LED light, her skin will just glow rainbow. It is really, really incredible.
Wow.
It just refracts light. Let's see if I can.
I see a little bit of it.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky to pick up on the webcam.
And that's a structural coloration thing, right? That's not a pigment.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, exactly. There's sort of a buildup of cells on top of their scales, and it creates this refraction of light. It's really one of the most beautiful species, I think, out there.
Nice. And what is the Latin? It's like Epicrates or something like that.
Yeah, Epicrates centurii. And I'll see if I can get her back on the screen for you guys.
So when you're doing sketching like this, it's just like nature journaling in the field. Sometimes you don't see the animal for a second, and that's your opportunity to work on your, you could be adding to your metadata, you could be adding to your notes, you could be adding some details that from memory, you could be writing down questions. For example, does anyone have any questions about the iridescence? That would be a good thing to ask some questions about. I'm noticing that the circles on the top sometimes are like two circles connecting together almost. That remind me of like cells dividing.
She's being a little tricky. Let's see if we can get her face. There we go.
The head seems pretty small relative to the girth of the body.
Yes, it is. It is. Her head is quite slender, exactly. Compared to the next animal I'll show you in a second, this head is a lot thinner.
And are these arboreal as well?
They spend a ton of time on the ground. They're certainly capable of climbing, and in the wild, they are definitely found in trees. But I would say they're more of a generalist for sure.
Okay. Are there other species in this genus?
Yes, yeah, there are Colombian Rainbow Boas as well, and they sort of have a brown, sort of tannish color. And I mean, they're both beautiful in the sunlight. They both refract light, incredible. But the Brazilian has that orange, beautiful orange. That really makes them quite a striking species.
Nice.
I mean, and that pattern again is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And there's a good shot of her. Oh, not a great shot of her belly, but sort of a white, sort of cream-colored belly.
I had the good fortune of nature journaling at a zoo type center in Ecuador that was all reptiles and amphibians, and they had that was the first time I got a nature journal and sketch a rainbow boa. And one of the things that I did while I was there is I nature journaled the patterns on all the snakes, and most of them did have a thing where the underside was paler than on top. And in some animals, I think that's called counter shading, where the underside is lighter, and that kind of takes away from the three-dimensionality that usually an animal will be darker underneath from the way the sun is creating shadows on it.
Right.
And I think if I remember correctly, the only one that I didn't notice that on was on the Emerald Tree Boa.
So the emerald tree boas wasn't a lighter belly?
No, it was a different color, but it didn't actually seem like a lighter color.
Gotcha, gotcha.
If
Yeah, yeah.
I remember correctly, I would have to recheck that journal
And
page.
that would be a species that spends, almost all of its time in the trees. So that could be a slightly different evolutionary,
Right.
color.
Okay, here's a good chance to get some quick sketches in of the snake sort of periscoping or reaching out there.
And the other thing with this species is they are very, very aquatic. This one in particular
Oh,
loves to spend a lot of time in her water dish, or I have a big pond for her, and especially after she's eating or going to the shed. I've seen her spend, gosh, I want to say like 4 or 5 days straight submerged in the water just with her nose and her nose basically sticking out. Now, it's going to be tough for me to get a shot of her head, but if anyone knows what an anaconda looks like, the eyes are almost on top of the head or on top of the skull. There's kind of a shot. And this species is similar to that in the same way. Their eyes are very high, far forward for that exact reason.
interesting. Because they spend a lot of time in the water.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, with just their nose and the tip of their eyes sort of just sticking out. There's a good shot. Now, I wish the iridescence would poke up, but if you guys just search Rainbow Boa or Brazilian Rainbow Boa on Google, it'll pop up and you'll see this incredible rainbow that comes off their skin.
In some ways, I'm kind of glad because iridescence is super hard to draw and paint.
Yeah, I bet.
All right, great. I'm going to
Right.
share my page here so people can see. I have a lot fewer complete sketches on this one. So if you weren't able to get that much in terms of like a gesture sketch of the body or head of the animal, that's fine. I also want to point out this technique here. Even if you're really intimidated by trying to draw a moving animal, you could just focus completely on one thing, like the spots. So right here, I tried to draw sort of a schema of the different types of spots that I was seeing, going from these open circles to these sort of eclipsed moon shapes to these solid dots to these sort of sometimes more pale dots on the bottom. And then after I did that, I noticed that on the back, there were sometimes these spots where it looked like these two of the rings were linking together. So remember, if you're not able or you're feeling intimidated by the moving animal, you can always just focus on one aspect of it. And that is a strategy that applies in nature as much as in this kind of a situation where we have a pet animal. And it looks to me like those rings on the back, as they're closer to the head, they're more like single rings and they're not joining up into multiple rings.
Oh yeah. Definitely sort of the top third is very much circles, and they sort of, as you work her way down her body, they sort of deform a little bit.
Cool.
Like there's one that actually looks like a heart that we always kind of laugh at that one.
Oh, nice. Can you? Oh yeah, look at that. That does look like a heart. More circle, solid circle near top. Cool. Thanks, Dylan. What
No problem.
what are we gonna look at next?
Okay, so next is a Boa Imperator. This is sort of your common Colombian Boa. I'll go put this girl back and I'll grab her.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to leave my page right here so people can look at this and get ideas while we're waiting for the next one. And remember, you could be also adding in details and sort of notes about what you're seeing. Sometimes when you're drawing snakes or other reptiles and amphibians in nature, there will be a lot of movement and there will be events. So one thing that I've been really excited about practicing more lately is how to depict events using some strategies from comics or graphic novels. So in this case, I actually was at the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco, and witnessed this copperhead completely shedding its skin. Okay, well, let's put that aside because it looks like we've got a live snake here, so the live animal always takes precedence. It looks like I'm actually filling up the last page of my sketchbook, so I'm going to have to pull out a completely new sketchbook. Dylan, tell us what we're looking at here.
All right, so this is a Boa Imperator, or Imperator, some people say. And we got some really cool patterns in this one. So this is a species that's native to Colombia. Of course, I don't exactly know where they do sort of range through northern South America, even into southern South America and into Central America as well. So at this point in the hobby, sometimes the bloodlines do get a little bit mixed up. But this is likely a Colombian Boa. Let me see if I can get a shot of her head because their heads are so cool. Oh, I don't want her to type my keyboard. And she was born in 2015, so she's about 6 years old. She's about 6 feet. These animals can max out at sort of 7-8 feet likely, so she does have some growing to do. There's a shot of her head.
Wow.
They have some pretty distinctive features. That sort of spear on the top of her head.
Yeah.
They're incredibly inquisitive, always tongue flicking, quite relaxed for the most part. I'll see if I can get a shot of her tail here.
Oh, really chunky short tail there, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And sort of these like dark brown, reddish, like I would say like brick red blocks on the back of her tail. And there's the saddles there. A nice shot of the saddles.
So the saddles are those ones that they kind of look almost like the pattern on a black widow spider, or like
Exactly.
almost like an hourglass on the side. Okay.
Exactly. Yep. Now their cousins, the true red-tailed boas, have very similar patterns, but the tail is bright, sort of blood red, where the Colombian boas and the Central American ones are sort of like a brick red, like I said. But the actual sort of cryptic pattern is very similar in both species.
Got it. And these also have the heat sensing pits.
They don't actually. They do sense heat, but they don't have that sort of external pits like we saw with the python. Let me see if I can bring her closer to the camera. It's tricky.
Really good. This is really good practice, folks, for nature journaling things, real living animals. Sometimes words can be a really convenient tool when something is moving so much like this. It might feel more comfortable to use your words for description, and that is totally fine. Definitely use that. You can also write down your own frustrations. If you're really focused on drawing it and you're noticing you're struggling with the movement, write that down.
There we go. I really don't want her to unplug the mic.
Okay, that was a good little side view of the head for a second there.
See, in the wild, maybe you could catch them basking and they wouldn't be so crazy. But yeah, these are a beautiful species. This is the first species of snake that I ever bought. And they're just so relaxed and calm. And they're a great species for people who are, nervous around snakes, because they're really not crazy. You can let them go on the floor and they slowly crawl around.
Yeah. Aren't there ones that are kind of available for adoption, for sort of like rescue, because people get them when they're little babies and then they get too big, and then people all suddenly want to get rid of these adult snakes, adult boas in particular?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you're interested in an adult boa, I'm sure the rescue near you has one for adoption, because that's exactly it. People do get them when when they're first born. They are just so small,
Yeah,
like 50 grams basically, and now she's like 3,500 grams or something like that. So they're born so tiny, and you think, okay, this is okay, but you do need to provide for them. You need to provide a good enclosure size and space and the proper enrichment, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And sometimes that gets overwhelming.
nice. So at the very least, one thing folks could be doing is trying to sketch some of these shapes in the patterns that you're seeing, ones that are repeating. Sometimes focusing on geometric shapes is less intimidating than animal forms. So if you're noticing, like I am, that there's sort of these like chocolate chip sort of spots on the bottom that are less geometric, maybe just capturing a quick sketch of those and then some words next to it. And then, like I said before, using your words to describe movement is always is usually a comfortable thing for people to do. You can also just be taking notes about some of the factoids that Dylan is dropping here. I highly recommend at least getting those saddles. That's such a cool shape. And then it looks like a lot of times related to those are these sort of squished triangles on the side of the saddles where it starts to go down onto the side, and then there's diamonds on the side. So these are all things that you could be trying to capture, even if you don't feel comfortable trying to sketch the volumetric shape of the snake. Those are all things that are sort of low-hanging fruit in this case. I'm going to put my camera on here as well so you can get an idea really of how basic what I have is, so that you're not being too hard on yourself. So you can see here, I did get the tail, so that was a lucky catch. I think there, whoops, I kind of messed up the head with that line. I did get some side views of the head here on a little bit. Oh, here we go. That was nice. Trying to get that, see how that dark line goes up to the eye. A lot of snakes have their cryptic pattern actually goes through the eye, which is really interesting. So you could be adding details to a previous little sketch that you got in before. Front view of the
Little mustache at
yeah,
the
that's
front.
cool.
So again, this is a really cryptic pattern, and you think, okay, this one's a little more obvious as far as the pattern goes. The jungle carpet python was so stark and bright, and this one, she's got more subdued colors, sort of grays, browns, like that reddish type color that I said. But when she's underneath leaf litter, you cannot see this animal. She just camouflages so nicely, sitting underneath leaf litter. It's just incredible. They just basically disappear. So, which makes sense. I mean, look how much that pattern's broken up. It's going to draw you away from the animal, your eye away from the animal very easily.
The last time I saw a boa species in the wild, it was actually at my dad's farm in Costa Rica, and there was all of these birds alarming, and there's a species of birds there that they do a snake alarm call, and they were doing the snake alarm call, but I didn't see, and I went to where they were doing it up in this tree, but I didn't see anything. And I thought, oh, maybe it's a false alarm. And then finally I found there was a boa way up in the tree. And so the snakes basically, I mean, the birds were the only way I knew it was there.
Yeah, that is incredible. Yeah, there's boas all over Central America. I saw one boa when I was in Costa Rica, but unfortunately it was on the road as roadkill. But
Oh, no.
yeah, so that was the only one I saw. But hopefully when I go there in the future, I can see more, because they're incredible, and they do eat a lot of birds, especially migratory birds. And it's an amazing. This is an incredibly strong species of snake. They are really solid muscle, and even just she's a little bit more relaxed. I have another boa that's, when he grabs you, he not for aggression or anything, but just to grip onto you. It's pretty intense.
Someone in the comments, Leslie, is asking, how much does she weigh?
I think she weighs about 3,500 grams. So was that like, is that 7 or 8 pounds or something like that?
Okay.
and she's got lots of growing to do. Like I said, she is 6, but I have fed her incredibly slowly, and maybe that's something we can talk about later as well. That is an issue in the reptile hobby, is people overfeed. Let me see. And so I fed her very slow. So she's got lots of growing to do, and I don't mind. It could take her maybe, 8, 9 years to hit her. Oh no, she's clicking buttons on my mouse. It could take her 8 or 9 years to reach that adult size, which is perfectly okay for me. Of course, they do continue to grow throughout their whole life, but it does sort of taper off as they age.
Cool. All right, I'm going to go through a couple things that I did on my page here. I just want to show you some really simple things. This, for example, I got like a microsecond view of this sort of triangle type shape on the front of the snake, sort of where the tongue was coming out. So just even little things like that pieced together. This is like totally legit nature journaling, and really good practice. If you don't nature journal from live animals yet, I highly recommend practicing it, and this is a great opportunity. If you come back and watch this video later, of course, you could pause at any time to sketch the animal. And if you have one of your own, which we're going to start talking about in a moment, then obviously that's a super good opportunity to nature journal from your own pet. All right, great. Well, let's jump more into the conversation part here. So I'll switch to my regular camera.
And I'll just go put her back in her home. Give me a second.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, in that case, I might actually show some. Let me see if I can find one of my nature journals from when I was in Ecuador and I did all those snake patterns. All right, while Dylan's looking for that, I'm going to see if I can find my nature journal from Ecuador, because I did all of these snake patterns. Maybe some of you have seen it before, where I tried to separate the pattern from the overall shape of the snake. Luckily, I have my new organization system on my journal, so it doesn't take me forever to find things. So let me show you some of my snake patterns here. So this is perfect because these are some of the snakes we were actually just looking at. So you can see here how I tried to simplify these patterns. And like I mentioned before, the counter shading, but I sort of flattened the snakes out. This is actually a Bushmaster right here. So instead of trying to draw the shape of the snake and the pattern, I just simplified it to the pattern. This is the Emerald Tree Boa that I was mentioning, where it looks like pretty much the same value. They are different colors, but if you squint your eyes, they're basically equally dark, with these noticeable white spots though. And then here is another page that I did there where you can see, in this case, I drew the Emerald Tree Boa, but I didn't put the pattern on it. I just did the shape of the snake. You can also see I did iterations, so when you're not sure, you can always draw multiple ones. This was, I think this was the Bothrops atrox, which is the O asper. This is another pit viper. And then let me see if I have, oh, here we go. Here's the Rainbow Boa. I tried to do it. Also notice how I use this note here to show it going from darker to lighter. That's the counter shading. Here is this one, they had it labeled as Boa Constrictor. So same genus as the Boa Imperator. And you can see how I tried to show the pattern from the side, and then all of these questions and sort of how I tried to understand what the colors were, and then labeled them afterwards. So those are some examples of working on stuff like that. But right now, let's talk a little bit more about reptiles and keeping reptiles at home, since that's your specialty, and your podcast and your YouTube channel are all about that. So for people who don't have snakes as pets, or don't have that much experience or knowledge about snakes as pets, like what are some things that they need to know?
Well, I guess there really is lots. I mean, there are many species of snakes that are commonly kept in captivity, and it is amazing how much the herpetoculture, the practice of keeping reptiles and amphibians, has grown over the past probably 15 to 20-ish years. It's really exploded, and it is becoming a much more popular hobby, and there are many different sections of the hobby. There are people that focus on, in specific species, or there are people that really focus on creating these amazing, beautiful natural habitats, and sort of everything in between. And if you are getting into snakes, or you want to get into snakes, there's plenty of resources at this point available for people to start to learn about them. But if you are somebody who is passionate about nature and love to watch and interact with nature, I love reptiles for that reason. They're not they're not a pet that you need to take for walks every day and all these things. So if you're someone that's maybe a little bit busier and you don't want to have to interact with them on a daily basis, then it's really a great animal to have.
Cool. So so besides those, you listed some already, like why do you think people are attracted to keeping reptiles at home?
It's a good question. I think there's many different answers. So like I said, some people are wanting to connect with nature. Some people want to just be part of a community, and I really do think that's a big part of it. Is I think hobbies are very important for people to have. Now, everybody on this call right now are listening to this, as well as yourself, Marley. You obviously, with drawing, is a passion of yours, right? And it's something to sink your teeth into and focus and get better at. And personally, I really think a lot of people become obsessed, is maybe not the right word because it sounds negative, but I'm going to use it anyway. Obsessed with keeping reptiles because they're looking for that creative outlet, and keeping reptiles actually allows you to be very creative. You have to build an enclosure, you have to do some studying to figure out where these animals are from, what are you trying to replicate as far as the natural replication goes, and it's a constant evolving process. As the animal grows, you need to expand. As new information comes out, you may have to change your thinking. It's this constant thing, and I think for most people, keeping reptiles fulfills that human instinct to have a creative outlet.
Cool. So I'm just going to share this comment here. We don't necessarily need to go into this right now. Maybe it'll come up later. But I have heard from people who had like allergies. They used to be really into keeping cats, and then they had allergies, and then they were like, okay, they got a snake instead because it doesn't shed or whatever. We don't. Thanks, Gene, for posting that. We don't need to go into that too much right now. Ivea also has a really good question that I think we'll tackle soon. But let's kind of keep going with the thread of the conversation here, because what I want to try to do is actually sort of draw a connection between nature journaling and keeping reptiles, just to help like people in the nature journaling community like see like what we're talking about. So like, do you think, and I have a lot of my own ideas, but I'm sort of curious from your perspective, like how do you think those two sort of practices could complement each other, if at all? Yeah, like how do you think of like nature journaling? Maybe you've seen some of it like from some of my content and whatnot, but like is basically a way of using like drawing, note taking, and numbers to help learn about nature in a sketchbook. So like, how do you think those two things could work together, or maybe not at all? And like, how do you think maybe people in the reptile hobby might actually benefit from some of the like journaling practices?
Okay, well, I would say the first thing is, as our society evolves and we grow larger and people become less connected with nature, that's actually a big problem I see. People that just live in the city all the time and don't have access to nature, that can actually, I think it has a massive negative impact on people. And that, people will leave their city, they'll go to camping for the weekend, and they'll realize they have this, it's like a weight lifted off their shoulders. I just moved out of the city, and I, immediately sleep better. It's darker, it's quieter, and you hear the animals outside. And so I think it is a human instinct to be surrounded by nature. And that is another thing that the hobby offers, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is keeping animals in your home allows you to connect with nature. And that really, I think, meshes perfectly with nature journaling, especially if you are somebody who lives in the city, you don't have immediate access to nature. You can actually bring a slice of the Peruvian rainforest, let's say, into your living room. You can spend the time working on it, building up an enclosure, an ecosystem, putting an animal in there, and then you can study it and journal it by nature journaling. And I think it actually works out really well. One of the things that I really push on the podcast is there actually is not a ton of scientific literature about reptiles. If you ranked it from mammals all the way down to reptiles are the sort of the last on on that ladder. It's just not been a very popular group of animals to study. And us as keepers actually have the opportunity to do science at home. If you have things set up properly and you're documenting everything, you can progress science. I know people who are now getting involved with universities because of the way they keep their animals at home, and the universities like what they're doing, and then it brings that academic side in. So nature journaling would be a major part of that. If you were trying to change lighting around, or change the setup of an enclosure, you can journal what behaviors you're seeing from the animal. And then maybe a couple months later, you say, okay, now I'm wondering if the animal responds better to this spectrum of light. I'm going to add that in. Then you might journal that over the next couple of weeks and see how is this behavior changing. So I think documenting how you care for your animals is really important, and nature journaling is perfect for that.
Cool. Wow, that's really cool. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned this a little bit, but like this whole access to nature issue, I think was really noticeable in the nature journaling community, especially with COVID. And a lot of times it comes up when people think that they can't do nature journaling unless they can go to Yosemite or the Grand Canyon or somewhere like with like amazing wilderness and just like no houses or whatever. But a lot of people during COVID didn't have access to those places. And it also made us realize that, hey, there's actually a lot of people who don't have access to these places even without COVID. So could you talk a little bit about, like you said, bringing a slice of the Peruvian rainforest, like how is this different and how does this change like accessibility compared to, like traveling? Like what are the differences there?
Well, I think, like you said, it's not everybody has immediate access to nature, and it's not feasible for everybody to get out of the city every single week to have that moment. And that is what I think the aquarium hobby or the fish keeping hobby sort of does the same thing. And the reptile herpetoculture is moving to that direction where people are seeing it more of setting up these environments in your home rather than just focusing on the animal itself. There is an issue in herpetoculture of people keeping their animals very simplistically because we become focused on the animal only. It's okay, this snake is beautiful, look at the snake, but we don't spend any time focusing on the environment it's in. But we're moving away from that, and that is perfect for trying to bring nature into your home. And it it actually solves that problem really well, because if you are surrounded by concrete like many of us are, going home and having access to maybe an 8-foot or a 6-foot enclosure with plants and an animal moving around with a lighting setup, it's really a remarkable experience. And I think it can be a powerful substitute to being in nature.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that. I definitely, for me, I've mainly noticed it when I was trying to nature journal every single day. So I did like, I think it was 2 falls ago, I did one of these like 30-day challenges where I was trying to nature journal every single day. And what I realized is it meant I couldn't go to places. I often had to nature journal at home. And so having reptiles in, that I could see and like, orchids or like houseplants or whatever, that definitely like had a huge difference.
Well, yeah, and the plants too, right? Like that's a huge part of herpetoculture as well, as people are getting a lot more into caring for plants and you know branching out the species that we have rather than just the pothos, which is the sort of the typical plant. And that gives you a whole array of things. And then in a cleanup crew as well, for those of you that don't know, some people keep bioactive enclosures, which allows you to introduce invertebrates into the enclosure that do, cleaning up the mold and the feces and whatnot. And that is another layer of journaling that can be done. So really it's almost a never-ending thing if you do it properly.
Yeah, that's really cool. That seems very complimentary to me. I still think it's very at the like nature journaling is still really niche. I mean, reptile keeping and amphibian keeping is niche, but like I feel like nature journaling is even smaller. And then like the overlap between those two is minuscule, at least at the moment. But like one of my goals is to get more people doing that. And I have some questions about that we can get into in a second. But first, let's talk about like, because I've also nature journaled some, like looking at other people's animals. Like I've gone and visited, our mutual friend Roy, and like gone and looked at his snakes. And I just spent like, I think I spent like 4 hours in his reptile room nature journaling. And so people who don't keep their own, it is possible to go visit either institutions or individuals that are doing this. Let's go into another topic right now. And I think like on your podcast, on your website, right underneath the name of your podcast, Animals at Home, it says exploring the ethics of captive exotic animals through the lens of biological science, conservation, and human nature. So there's a lot of concepts wrapped up into there. But like right away, I'm noticing the word ethics. So why is that important to you? And like, what do people need to know about that? And like, why do you put that so far up in your sort of list of values there?
Well, a few years ago, I was sitting looking at one of my boas, and I thought, what experience is this animal having? Is anything about being in captivity a positive experience for this animal? And so I started dwelling on that question: am I keeping these snakes only because I enjoy keeping snakes? Because that would actually not be fair to the animal, because you're taking its freedom away. Now, these animals were not wild caught or anything, but if you extrapolate a few generations back, you're going to find a wild caught animal. So the question is this purely a selfish endeavor, or is there anything better about it? So I spent a long time thinking about that, and I think there are many positives that we can offset the lack of freedom that our captive animals have. We can maybe talk about that in a second. But so I was sitting there looking at this animal, and then I realized, okay, at least the very first thing I can do is attempt to replicate its natural environment as best as I can. So, doing a better job of giving it more enrichment and adding elements of its natural world into its enclosure in the best way I could. Now, the problem, if you walk too far down that path, you eventually get to the same sort of point where it's like, if I'm trying to perfectly replicate the Peruvian rainforest, for example, wouldn't it just be better for this animal to be in the rainforest? Why must it be in my room? So that really was the ethics side. It's like, what are we doing here? And I've really explored that concept deeper. And I do think there's powerful reasons to have animals in captivity. The biggest one is conservation. The animals are being, the habitats that these animals live in are quite often being wiped off the face of the earth. So anything that we can do to keep these animals alive on the earth, whether that's in colonies that are just captive or colonies that eventually will be bred and re-released into the wild, that is being done. So there's that side. And for me personally, I thought, well, the least I can do is A, make the animal's home better in captivity, and then B, raise some money for the wild counterparts that are in the wild. So there are wild boas right now that are being threatened by mining and logging and whatnot in the Amazon. So what can I do personally with my hobby to make sure that I'm at least supplying some funding to make sure we're protecting that section of the rainforest? And that's what the podcast does. I do take a small portion of the money that I make from it, and I donate it to the Amazon Rainforest Conservancy, which is a Canadian charity. So we've raised a bunch of money for them. And for me, I think that's a really important part of the hobby, and we can't just be in it for ourselves. There must be something in it for the animals, because it's just not fair to them otherwise. Because like I said, they have sacrificed their freedom, and that's a big sacrifice, and we are obligated to justify it. And so however any keeper does that, it could be through outreach, teaching people about these animals, through showing them. It could be using the animals to do science, like we talked about earlier. It could be talking about, raising money for conservation, as I mentioned. There are many ways to do it, but I think there's something that has to be just merely having the animal is not enough. But having the animal and really pushing the care is a really great start.
Cool. Wow. That's a lot there. So I hope people are like paying attention to that. That was really great. I feel like we could keep going on this, but I want to address some of the questions that people are asking here. Maybe we can just quickly kind of go through some of them just to show some love to the audience. So first one here is by Ivea. I'll just show it up there so you can see it.
Are most pet snakes raised by breeders, or are they captured from wild areas? Okay, well, so the question is, are most snakes captive bred, or are they wild caught? And I would say most are captive bred at this point, especially for the popular species. There's lots of breeders that are working with the common species. There are many animals that are still wild caught. It does happen. And for me, I don't have a problem with wild caught animals if they're ending up in the homes of people that are going to breed those animals and perpetuate a captive colony. I'm not a huge fan of wild caught animals ending up in the PetSmarts or the big chain pet stores just to go home to, the 8-year-old birthday party type situation, which does happen all the time, unfortunately. So to answer the question, there's definitely both, but a lot of the animals you'll see if you go to like a reptile expo, for example, or at somebody's house, most of those are going to be captive bred, but not all of them.
Okay, great. And that's a huge topic. So I'm sure you probably have some episodes on your podcast and some other content about that. Let's answer Ray Bonto's question here too.
Do people eat snakes? If so, does it affect the population? Yes, people do eat snakes, and I don't know. I don't think it affects the population that much. In East Asia, people eat snakes. People eat a lot of different foods there. And I did have someone on my podcast a couple episodes ago that lives in Thailand, and he's an American, but he lives in Thailand, and he said he's eaten snake a couple times. And from what I know, the snakes that are being eaten are really common snakes that are found in the cities that just sort of make their way from the rainforest into the city. People typically aren't eating rare or endangered animals just because the reason you're eating it is because it's accessible rather than something that's a little bit more endangered.
All right. Thanks for that question, Ray Bonto. And then there's another one here from Leslie about feeding. So let's see if we can check this one off here.
So in this case, do the snakes starve when they can't eat when they want? I'm not sure if I understand the last part of the question, but do the snakes starve when they can't eat when they want? Well, the amazing thing about snakes is they are unbelievably efficient. One of the issues as being a human is we are warm-blooded, so we spend a tremendous amount of our caloric intake on just running at 98 degrees, right? We're burning calories just to maintain our body temperature. Now, snakes and reptiles are cold-blooded, which means they have to move within their environment to control their body temperature. Now, because of that, they save a ton of time or a ton of energy on not having to constantly maintain this temperature. So they'll go up underneath their heat lamp, they'll warm up, their blood will warm up, and then that's good for them. They don't have to use their energy. So I think it's something like 10% of the energy. They require 10% of the caloric intake that we require to maintain our body temperature. And because of that, they are very efficient at storing the energy that they are given, because in the wild, snakes are more often than not unsuccessful when they're hunting. They're especially the boas and the carpet python as well. They're ambush hunters, so they will sit in one spot for days and days on end. And if a prey item comes by, they'll try to snatch it. Most of the time, they're going to fail. So in the wild, these animals might eat anywhere between maybe like 3 and 12 meals a year or something. I mean, it could be different. They could be eating a bunch of small meals or fewer big meals, but for the most part, they are not going to be eating that many meals. And in captivity, people get kind of stuck on thinking, okay, every 2 weeks they need to eat. If a human went 2 weeks without food, you'd be really hungry. So it's kind of hard to translate it into the snake world. But really, the animals do not need to eat very much. I fast all 4 of my snakes in the winter, so they'll give them like 60 or 90 days off of eating completely, and then typically they're eating sort of once a month type thing. And in captivity as well, they're not going to be burning as much energy. They don't have as much freedom to roam around. They're not going to be, climbing trees and doing things that, they do in the wild. So we do have to be careful, and you can make a snake grow by feeding it. That's one of the sad things is people that want a big snake. It's easy to make your snake big, but they will die very fast of fatty liver disease and whatnot, and obesity basically. I hope that answered the question.
Great question, Leslie, and great answer. It's another opportunity to learn about something and just like realize how different animals can be. So it's come up a couple times. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast, and I'll post the link to all of your podcasts are available on your YouTube as well. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah. Pretty much. So if you go to the YouTube channel, you'll see all the podcasts that I've produced. And then I have another person that also makes podcasts under my network. And those aren't on my YouTube channel, but you can find them at my website. So if you do post the animalsathomenetwork.com, you'll find it there.
Got it. So tell us a little bit about your podcast and how you got started with it.
So I started the podcast. I actually originally started a YouTube channel just kind of out of virtue of I was writing a blog, a reptile related blog, and I ended up doing some sort of DIY enclosure type thing. So I thought, okay, I'll film that. I'll put that on YouTube. And so I started kind of semi-regularly making YouTube videos. If I got a new animal, whatnot, I would do a video on it. And I quickly realized, I didn't feel like I knew enough about animals to be talking about them overly, reptiles too much. And then the second thing was, and you see this on YouTube a lot, is you can get into this trend of having to give yourself content. You go and buy an animal, and then you do an unboxing video, you set the enclosure up, and then you have to go buy another animal. So you end up getting this vicious cycle, and you can see it on YouTube all the time. People have these massive collections, and you get stuck in this cycle. And I really, A, didn't have the money to do that, B, didn't have the space, and C, just didn't want to do that in general. So it hit me back in the summer of 2018. I thought, well, why don't I have a podcast? Because that will give me regular content. It will not force me to buy new animals to create content. And then I can bring experts on, and they can tell us all about the reptiles that they keep, and then I don't have to feel like I'm forced to. It was, I guess, sort of like imposter syndrome, where you're trying to. Really, what I thought is it would be much better for my followers to watch me learn about keeping reptiles rather than me trying to spout this information. So that's how it started originally, and I really wanted to explore the ethics of keeping reptiles, like we talked about earlier. What are the practices that we must engage in to make sure keeping reptiles is ethical, and that we're not just exploiting the animals and just keeping them for our own purposes. So that is sort of in a nutshell where the podcast came from. And it's called Animals at Home. It's on YouTube as well as any other podcasting platform. I'd say 95% of the episodes, just listening to the audio is fine. Once in a while, I do put out a video, an episode that most of the people will go watch on YouTube just because there's some visual elements, but it ranges from, biologists to incredibly veteran reptile keepers to veterinarians to very wide breadth of guests. And we really just discuss, it's less about the reptile and more about what we can do as keepers to improve ourselves. And I think that's where it is different from many of the other reptile podcasts. A lot of reptile podcasts delve deep into different species and whatnot. And we do that once in a while, but for the most part, it's about how can we be better caregivers to the animals that we have in captivity?
Cool. So I just posted the link to your YouTube channel and your podcast there in the comments, so people can click over that way.
Awesome.
Thanks for sharing about that. And then one other thing while we're on this topic is you use Patreon, correct? Could you talk a little bit about your Patreon and just how that has been for you and what Patreon is?
Sure. Yeah. So for those who don't know what Patreon is, it's basically a subscription. It's a service that allows creators to have a subscription service. So you can get your listeners or your followers to pay a subscription fee to get sort of some bonus extra content. And to be honest, originally, I didn't want to do a Patreon account because in some ways it feels, even though it's a tremendous amount of work to produce the podcast on a weekly basis, it can feel awkward setting something up and sort of asking people for money. And so, and that's not actually what it is, but it feels like that as the creator. So I didn't do it for a long time, but earlier this year, I started having my regular listeners ask for it. They were asking, hey, we want you to do a Patreon. And that's kind of when it dawned on me is, well, I guess I should rewind one step back. One of the other reasons I didn't want to do a Patreon account is because once people start paying you a monthly subscription fee, you sort of feel obligated to provide something extravagant for them. It's like, oh my God, somebody's giving me $4 or $5 a month. What am I going to do every month to make it worth their time? But what I realized is that my listeners, my dedicated listeners, really wanted to support the channel as is. They were happy with the content and they just wanted to show support. It wasn't that they wanted extra content. So that's when it dawned on me, okay, I'll give them this avenue to support the show if they want. So basically, I do have a Patreon account. The middle tier is the $5 tier. That's where most people sit. And if you are a patron, you get the episodes a couple of days early. As long as I've edited in time, they get the episodes early. And they also will have access to the guests, the upcoming guests. They'll know who's coming up. So if they want to ask specific questions, they can let me know and I'll make sure to fold that into the conversation. But for the most part, it's just this great community of people. And like I said, many of the people just want to support the show. So they don't even go on the Patreon account. They just pay their $5 a month. And I'm super grateful and humbled by that. But there are people who are pretty active on the account and we have discussions back and forth and it gives me closer access to the listeners as well, which is really nice.
Cool. It sounds similar to my experience with Patreon, so I definitely can relate to a lot of what you just described. So, what would you do if you had like 500 Patreon patrons and like maybe I don't know, like $5,000 a month? Like what would you do with your work and your project? Or let's make it even a bigger number. Like if it were like I don't know, like $6,000 to $10,000 a month and tons of Patreon patrons. Would that change what you're doing now?
Well, I would do a couple of things. The first thing I would do is obviously continue to improve the quality of the show. Right now, with the podcast, I do all the work myself, and if Patreon were ever to get to a point where I could pay someone to help me edit, that would be amazing because it really does take me a long time. So that would help me improve the show because then I could just focus on interviewing people and setting up things, and so that would be one thing that I would do for sure. And then another thing I would do is just improve the animals' homes and the living conditions that they're in. I'm happy with the way things are set up, but you're never completely satisfied. You always want to be pushing the limits, and I want to do much larger enclosures and whatnot. Of course, everything is expensive when it comes to keeping reptiles. So those would be two things for sure that I would do: improve the animals' homes, and then also just continue to improve the show and get some help on it. I would love there to be a day where I can actually where my podcast pays my salary as well as somebody else's salary. I think that would be a really cool experience, and that just shows you how interested and dedicated people are to learning about improving the welfare of the animals we keep.
Cool. We're sort of, I wish we could go into like some more of these topics that I was hoping to talk about, but just so that we don't make this super long, I think one of the other questions that I wanted to ask is, what would be the sort of holy grail for you in your work? Like if there was like one project that you can do and you want to be like known for, after you're gone from this planet and whatnot, like what would be sort of the holy grail for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and one of the weird I will answer this question maybe a little bit of a roundabout way. One of the weird experiences for me is years ago I listened to reptile podcasts and I really enjoyed them, and one of the podcasts that I really liked was called Herp Nation Radio, and they kind of disappeared, and you actually can't even find the shows anymore, and I was really disappointed in that. And so that disappeared, and then I was stuck with this ethical quandary, like I was saying earlier. Is this something that should we even be keeping reptiles? And now there's this weird experience where if that question comes up on social media or Facebook or whatnot, typically in the comments, you'll see people recommending the podcast, which is one of the weirdest experiences for me ever, because I'm sitting back thinking, I love reptile podcasts and I love this question about ethics. And now when I see that conversation happening organically online, my project is one of the go-to things to have that, think about that question. So in some ways that is already a bit of a holy grail for me. It is such a bizarre experience. And so that's been tremendous. But I think I would love to get to a point where the show just continues to grow. I would love to get to a point where I could travel to places. I've met so many incredible people across the whole world. I think having a conversation in person is always even more fruitful than having it online. And I would love to do that. So I think if I were to if someone to say what would you want there to be left if you were gone, as far as animals at home goes, I would really hope that people think about that was one of the catalysts for pushing keeping reptiles into a higher welfare standard. And it's something that's always thought about when we come to that question. And like I said, it's already kind of there, but I just want that to continue to grow.
That's really cool. So that sort of leads to my next question, which is, what do you think is the future of reptile keeping in this sort of planet that we live in, and sort of the state of things in the world today? What do you see as the future of herpetoculture?
Okay, I'll give you my optimistic answer first. And so what I hope that could eventually happen, and we kind of chatted about this off air a little bit. You had mentioned the Reptile Preservation Party, and that's linked with the organization, the Abronia Alliance. And the Abronia Alliance is a foundation started by Forrest Fanning and Nick Gordon. And what they do is they have this, they work with Abronia, which is a genus of lizard, and they are quite endangered, or some of the species specifically are very endangered. And they work on bringing these animals in, teaching people how to captive breed them. They have a sort of a group across the whole planet, and they're attempting to save this species or this group of species. And I think I would love for that model to be the future of herpetoculture, where people focus on 1 or 2 species at a time. These are animals that are endangered, or the habitat that they're from is endangered, and we can be a member. I want people to think of herpetoculture as a conservation movement, where you have people that keep these snakes in order to raise money to send to locations that are being, deforested and whatnot. And I do think that is the future. I hope that's the future. And it doesn't mean everybody has to work with endangered species, but if everybody has that mindset of conservation and making sure that we're not taking advantage of the animals and we're protecting the wild, I think that would be hugely positive. And I do hope that is the future. Now, the pessimistic side of me says that maybe one day we will not be allowed to keep reptiles. And I just moved out of a city a couple weeks ago that has basically banned keeping reptiles entirely, almost. And I'm in Canada, and that has not officially come into legislation yet, but they're talking about it, and it was proposed. And I think if that does end up happening, it's sort of the first domino in Canada to fall. And we've seen a few other provinces kind of go the same way. And there are very powerful animal rights groups and activists that only see the negative side of the hobby, but they don't see the positive side. They don't see the science, the conservation, the introduction to animals at a young age. Quite often, their first experience with reptiles is in a captive setting, and who knows what kind of impact you can have on a child's life when you introduce them to an animal in a positive way. There are so many different positives of herpetoculture, and there are groups out there that don't see that at all, and their goal is to extinguish it from the face of the earth. And in some ways, they're doing a great job of that. So that is the scary side of it, and the pessimistic side. My optimist side is that we can show that we are beneficial, we're positive, we're raising money, and people are keeping conscientiously.
Wow, that's the big one. That's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So sort of just like one last thing then, you talked about the Reptile Preservation Institute. I'll show my page. When I went to that, it was an online event, but here's my page when Nick Gordon was talking about the Abronia Alliance. And it was very interesting to see how people at that event were talking about preservation. There was also this guy from RAPS, the World Reptile Amphibian Preservation Society, and talking about how people keeping animals at home can form this sort of invisible arc and be sort of doing similar thing to like what zoos are doing. Also, one other thing that you pointed out is those early experiences connecting to nature as a kid reminded me of Richard Louve's book called Last Child in the Woods. And he pointed out how we're currently in our concern for the environment, making a lot of activities illegal that are actually the ways that people connected with nature. And many of these conservationists today connected with nature through fishing, through building tree houses, through hunting, and through doing things in the woods where they're actually more hands-on. So it's something I've been thinking a lot about, is that dilemma of trying to protect nature to such a degree that humans are no longer actually having any meaningful emotional experiences with it. And then those people, when they grow up, might not actually really care about nature enough to vote in ways that help protect it. So that's definitely a super interesting conversation there. Is there anything that you want to share that we didn't get a chance to talk about, or anything that I should have asked you before?
I think we covered a lot. I would say if anybody's interested in, I would say one of the most exciting things for me with the podcast is I have so many listeners who do not keep reptiles. And I love that. I love that there are a group of people that are out there listening to the show who maybe one day will keep a reptile. So if you're listening to this and you think one day maybe you might get into that and you want to maybe keep a reptile, come listen to the show, get a good grasp of the information, and you will set yourself up for an incredible foundation. I always say I have the show that I wish I had listened to before I started keeping reptiles, because I kind of have to now retro do things. I have all these animals, and now it's like, oh wow, I'm now learning better husbandry tactics and husbandry practices, so I have to go backwards. And the show really sets a good foundation for people. So I would say, if anything, come listen to the show. Even if you don't have reptiles, you can get a ton from it, and hopefully you find it interesting.
Great. Thank you everyone so much for joining. And Dylan, thank you for making your time. I think people really appreciate it. Let me just share this comment from Gene here.
Awesome.
Thank you, Gene. Yeah, that was the idea, and I really do think like this is an interesting topic for nature journalers to be aware of, if not doing it at home, and also like reaching out and contacting people like Dylan and learning from their videos. You know, there's a lot of herpetoculturalists who like post videos of their animals or photos, and there's a lot that we can learn and participate in. All right, well, thank you everybody for who joined in for the live and people who are watching this as a recording. And thank you, Dylan, for making the time. It was a really fun conversation today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And we will have you on my podcast at some point soon, too.
Great. All right. Bye, everybody.